Emily Hartley adjusted the strap of her small leather backpack as she stepped into the cool, polished interior of Terminal 6 at JFK International Airport. The overhead lights cast soft reflections across the marble floors, and the subtle hum of early morning travelers surrounded her. She held her first-class ticket tightly in one hand, a boarding pass tucked neatly inside the sleeve of her book, Pride and Prejudice. She didn't look like someone who belonged in first class, not that she cared. Dressed in a faded denim jacket, pale pink Converse, and her grandfather's old aviator watch on one wrist, Emily had always felt more at home blending in. What the flight attendant didn't know, what nobody here knew, was that she was the only grandchild of James Hartley, the late founder of Hartley Air. And more than that, thanks to her grandmother's trust, she now legally controlled 62% of the airline through the Hartley Family Trust. But none of that mattered right now. Not to the gate agent who barely glanced at her ID. Not to the woman in the Louis Vuitton trench coat who'd eyed her up and down as they stood in line. And certainly not to the flight attendant who would soon turn this ordinary boarding moment into something much uglier. She handed her ticket to the gate agent, smiled politely, and made her way onto the plane. Row 1A. Window seat. First class. She slid into the buttery leather seat, placing her book and backpack gently under the footrest. A few passengers in the premium rows turned their heads, one or two giving her that look, half confusion, half dismissal, as if trying to figure out whether she'd wandered into the wrong cabin. She ignored it. She always did. Moments later, a tall flight attendant approached. He was in his early 50s, trim, sharply dressed, with a practiced air of authority. His name tag read Mr. Lane. He stopped at her row and glanced down at his manifest, then back at Emily. "Miss, I believe you're in the wrong seat," he said, tone clipped. "This row is reserved for premium guests." Emily blinked up at him. "This is seat 1A, she replied, holding up her boarding pass. "That's what it says." He didn't even look at it. "I'm sure it does. But this seat is for our preferred clientele," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Would you mind stepping into the aisle so I can assist you to your correct location?" A few heads turned. One woman in the second row, a perfectly styled older woman in pearls, watched with quiet satisfaction. Emily didn't move. "This is my seat. I have a valid ticket." The flight attendant exhaled, clearly irritated now. "Miss, you're holding up pre-boarding. I'll ask you again. Please step out so we can clear this misunderstanding." She felt the burn of eyes on her, heard the shuffle of luggage and whispers, but she didn't shout. She didn't argue. She quietly reached into her jacket and pulled out the embossed silver envelope her grandmother had given her last Christmas, an official Hartley Trust card, issued under her name and role. She was instructed to carry it only when flying and only when things went wrong. But before she could say a word, he reached down and picked up her backpack without asking. With one smooth motion, he tossed it toward the front of the plane, and a small photo frame fell out, shattering across the floor. Emily froze. It was the only photo she had left of her grandfather, taken at the airline's first flight launch. His arm around her tiny 5-year-old self, smiling under the big silver H logo. The cabin fell silent as the sound of glass hit the aisle. "Unbelievable," the woman in pearls muttered under her breath, loud enough for others to hear. "Standards just aren't what they used to be." Emily's hands clenched, but her face remained still. Mr. Lane pressed the call button. "Security," he said into the comm. "We have a disturbance in first class. Possible fraudulent ticket." "You're making a mistake," Emily said, voice calm but firm. "I think we'll decide that," he replied, his eyes cold. 2 airport security officers appeared moments later. One of them hesitated as he looked at her face. He recognized the last name printed on the ticket, Hartley. But Mr. Lane was already speaking loudly enough for the cabin to hear. "Let's have her move to the back until we sort this out." The uniformed officer leaned in close. "Are you?" Emily barely shook her head, a subtle signal. "Not here. Not yet." She stood, picked up the shattered frame, gently tucked the photo into her jacket, Then, with quiet grace, she walked back toward the economy cabin as whispers followed her. The hum of the aircraft filled Emily's ears as she walked down the narrow aisle, clutching her broken photo frame close to her chest. Her seat in economy was near the back, 37C, by the restrooms. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. But the sting in her chest wasn't from being publicly humiliated. It was from something deeper, something that started the day her grandfather passed and left her with a legacy she wasn't sure she deserved. She sank into the cramped window seat and stared at the clouds forming just beyond the tarmac. 15 years old, first solo trip, and already she was reminded that, to most people, she didn't belong. Not because of how much she owned, not even because of what she represented, but because she didn't look the part. And in a world full of polished smiles and tailored uniforms, that was all it took. They think I'm invisible, she thought, staring out the window. And maybe that's a good thing. Invisible people see everything. She quietly pulled out her tablet and began typing notes, not out of spite, but as her grandfather had taught her. Always document what happens when things go wrong, he used to say, because one day you'll have to teach people how to fix it. Across the cabin, Mr. Lane returned to first class, his stride confident and his tone gracious as he offered a warm smile to the white-haired woman now seated in Emily's original seat. "Thank you for your patience, Ms. Whitmore," he said, pouring her a glass of champagne. "We strive to make our elite passengers feel at home." Ms. Whitmore gave a satisfied nod. Some standards still matter. Another attendant chuckled beside them. "At least she didn't make a scene. You handled it beautifully." Mr. Lane smirked. "Just doing my job. Can't have the wrong face in the wrong place." They all laughed. For a moment, it felt like business as usual. What they didn't know, what not a single soul on that plane realized, was that the wrong face they'd just dismissed held voting power that could fire the entire cabin crew before they even reached the next gate. Back in seat 37C, Emily watched the clouds drift by. Her fingers still shook slightly, but her mind was steady. "If I just fire him when we land, he'll never learn anything," she thought. "But if I let the system reveal itself, its patterns, its rot, then maybe this flight will mean something." She looked at the broken frame beside her. The glass was cracked, but the photo was intact. Her grandfather in his leather pilot jacket, smiling, with her 6-year-old self sitting on his shoulders, arms out like airplane wings. That photo had hung in his office until the day he died. Now, it was hers. She remembered sitting beside him in the hangar when she was 8, watching mechanics work on engines and engineers scribble formulas. Most granddaughters got fairy tales. Emily got maintenance reports and business memos. She loved every minute of it. Her grandfather had never treated her like a child, not when it came to the airline, not when it came to the future. "You don't earn a seat in first class by birthright," he once told her. "You earn it by knowing every bolt, every blade, every name of every person who makes it fly." That's why she hadn't fought back earlier. She had nothing to prove to Mr. Lane. He didn't even know who signed his paycheck. 20 minutes into the flight, a soft chime sounded. A young flight attendant named Olivia approached Emily's row. She looked nervous, clipboard in hand. "Miss Hartley?" she asked quietly. Emily glanced up, startled. "Yes?" Olivia lowered her voice. I'm so sorry about what happened earlier. I didn't realize. I just saw your name on the manifest and, well, I grew up hearing stories about your grandfather, James Hartley, the founder." Emily looked at her closely. She was maybe in her mid-20s, dark curls pulled into a tidy bun, posture stiff with tension. "I didn't know who you were until I saw your boarding pass in the system," Olivia continued. "You shouldn't be back here. You own more of this airline than any single person alive." Emily smiled faintly. "Don't worry. I'm observing and documenting." Olivia swallowed hard. "Do you want me to tell the captain? We could correct the seating issue." Emily shook her head. "No, let it ride. Let's see how far it goes." "Okay, just if you need anything at all." "I will," Emily said. Thank you." As Olivia walked away, Emily resumed typing. This time, her notes weren't just about what had happened. They were about what had always happened. The stories other passengers had told her. The subtle ways people were shifted. The unspoken rules about who looked like they belonged. And in that moment, she decided something. She wouldn't just handle this quietly. She'd dismantle it publicly. Because first class wasn't just about a seat. It was about a system, and she happened to own 62% of it. The flight was only an hour and 20 minutes long, but for Emily Hartley, it had become a masterclass in who people thought she was, and who they thought they could get away with being. She sat quietly in her cramped economy seat, the hum of the engines barely masking the conversations around her. Passengers whispered, some casting glances her way. Others barely noticed the teenager with the cracked photo frame tucked beneath her arm. That was fine. People showed you who they were when they thought you didn't matter, especially people like Bradley Lane. Back in first class, Bradley was now holding court. He laughed loudly, charming Ms. Whitmore with stories about the decline of travel standards and how, back in the day, first class wasn't so inclusive. Emily overheard a younger steward whisper to another crew member, "Did you see the look on that girl's face? Poor thing." Bradley, still unaware who Emily was, scoffed. "She should be grateful we didn't have her escorted off. I've had to do that before, you know. People think a pretty face and a fake ticket can buy class." Emily's grip on her stylus tightened, but she said nothing. No reaction, no public confrontation, just notes. She wasn't just watching for herself now, she was watching for the dozens of passengers who had experienced this same quiet humiliation and never had the means or position to speak up. Her grandfather used to say, "True power doesn't shout, it listens, it remembers, and when the time is right, it acts." That time wasn't now. Not yet. Across the cabin, Olivia, the young attendant who had recognized Emily, kept checking the manifest on her tablet, her brow furrowed. She watched Mr. Lane pour another flute of champagne for Ms. Whitmore, then lean down and whisper something that made the older woman chuckle. She couldn't hear it, but she saw enough of the man's lips to guess. "Let the peasant sip ginger ale." Olivia's jaw tightened. She had just started her job with Silverlight Airlines 8 months ago. It was supposed to be her big break, serving in first class, working her way up. She'd memorized every safety manual, every premium wine offering, every protocol. But none of that mattered when someone like Bradley decided you weren't their kind of flight attendant. He tolerated her because she kept quiet. She wouldn't this time. She tapped into the crew-only messaging channel on her device and began flagging oddities in the seating assignments and incident logs. Quietly, carefully. Because Emily Hartley wasn't the only one watching. In the back, Emily sipped her water and opened her grandfather's old journal app, encrypted and voice-locked to her alone. The interface looked old school, but the back end was elite. She'd updated the code herself last spring. She began recording voice notes. "Hartley memo, flight 842, 10:41 a.m., departure. Flight attendant Bradley Lane reassigned my first-class seat without reason or protocol. Publicly humiliated me. Ignored my valid boarding pass. Addressed Ms. Whitmore, an elderly white passenger, as a valued client, while implying I did not belong. Multiple crew members complicit by silence." She paused, then added, "Note, this is the 5th passenger complaint I've tracked involving Bradley over the past 3 months, all involving minorities or non-traditional passengers in premium class. Pattern emerging. Systemic?" She looked at the date. April 9th, 3 weeks from the annual board vote. And she held 62% of the company. She could fire everyone on this plane with one call if she wanted to. But she wouldn't. Not yet. Because exposure only meant something if the audience was watching. And they would be. As the flight entered its cruising altitude, a turbulence warning blinked on screen. The captain made a short announcement. Nothing major, just a rough patch over the Midwest. But Bradley used it. He strutted back to economy, checked seat belts, gave Emily a fleeting glance, and smirked. "You doing okay back here?" he asked, fake concern dripping from his voice. "I hope there are no hard feelings about earlier. We just have to follow protocol." Emily looked up, expression unreadable. "You're right," she said softly. "Protocol matters." He nodded, smug, as if she'd finally accepted her place. She returned to her notes. Final straw. Lane continues to gaslight affected passengers. Displays performative concern with no actual accountability. Logged for HR and board ethics review. She was done collecting evidence. When this plane touched down, the storm would begin. What would you do if someone dismissed your worth based on assumptions? Would you blow up on the spot, or wait, collect proof, and let truth do the speaking? Comment 1. If you'd confront them in public. Comment 2 if you'd build your case in silence, like Emily. Like if you believe that real power never begs to be seen. And subscribe to find out what happens when the seat they stole is the one you built. Emily sat quietly by the airport window, watching the plane she'd just been forced off taxi slowly away. Her reflection in the glass barely moved, but inside her, something was shifting, slowly but unmistakably. She didn't cry, not here, not now. Instead, she opened the small brown leather notebook she always kept tucked inside her satchel. The front page was worn from years of use, initially for doodles and diary entries when she was little. But today, it took on a new purpose. She titled the top of the next page in sharp black ink, Flight 382, Incident Log. 10:24 a.m., seated in 2A. 10:29 a.m., approached by flight attendant, Bradley W. 10:30 a.m., asked to give up seat for elderly preferred guest. 10:32 a.m., showed valid ticket, not accepted. 10:34 a.m., escorted off plane without explanation. Each entry was short, clinical, and precise. But in her head, every word echoed with more than just facts. It carried her humiliation, her disbelief, and now, her calm resolve. She glanced at the gate agent's counter, where Bradley was now gesturing animatedly with another crew member. He wasn't just rude, he was arrogant, entitled, and most of all, completely unaware of who he had just dismissed as if she were invisible. If only he knew. Emily's mind returned to her grandfather, James Hartley. She remembered how, on her 11th birthday, he took her inside the hangar where the first Hartley Air aircraft had been repainted. He let her dip the brush in navy blue and mark a small curve on the tail. The horizon line, he called it. "You're not just a passenger in this world, kiddo," he'd told her. "You own your place in it. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." At 15, those words rang louder than ever. A buzz on her phone pulled her back to the present. It was Olivia, the junior flight attendant who had tried, hesitantly, to defend her before being silenced with a sharp glare from Bradley. "Meet me by gate C-17 in 10. I can't text long." Emily hesitated. This wasn't part of the plan. Her dad had always told her not to engage during incidents. "Let the board handle it," he'd say. "We protect the family name by staying out of the spotlight." But something told her this wasn't just about image anymore. She walked briskly, notebook in one hand, boarding pass still clutched in the other. As she approached C7, Olivia was already pacing nervously near a vending machine, arms crossed, scanning the hallway. "I shouldn't be talking to you," Olivia said quickly. "But what happened back there wasn't right. He knew your seat was valid." Emily looked at her. "Then why did no one speak up?" Olivia's voice dropped. "Because people like Bradley run the crew culture. He's close with ops and corporate. People are afraid to push back." Emily didn't flinch. "So they let a kid get humiliated to protect their own paychecks?" There was no malice in her tone, just a quiet accusation that stung worse than a scream. Olivia looked down. "I'm sorry, I really am. He said, we don't want lawsuits over preferred passengers, and told me to keep quiet." Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The original email her father had sent to operations weeks ago, stating she would be traveling under the name E. Hartley without special treatment. "My grandfather built this airline," she said, "and I own 62% of it through the Hartley Trust. No one was supposed to know, because I wanted to see how people are really treated." Olivia's eyes widened. "Wait, you're that Hartley?" Emily nodded slowly. "And I'm documenting every detail now." She showed Olivia the notebook. Page after page was beginning to fill with precise time logs, quotes, and procedural errors. She even had a short voice memo from the gate area. An older woman nearby had whispered, "You'd think she was trying to sneak into first class or something," not knowing Emily had caught it with her phone's mic running. "I don't want revenge," Emily said calmly. "I want accountability, and I'm going to get it. Quietly, thoroughly, like my grandfather taught me." Olivia nodded, almost in awe. "I'll help. I've seen things, Emily. Things I've been scared to report." "Start writing," Emily said, handing her a blank page torn from the notebook. "Use my name if you need to." As they parted ways, Emily returned to a quiet corner of the airport lounge. She ordered a small black coffee, not because she needed the caffeine, but because she needed something to anchor her while she worked. By the time the sun began to set behind the massive airport windows, she had 4 pages of documented irregularities, witness statements, quotes from crew conversations, and operational code violations she knew would make compliance departments sweat. She wasn't just a teen anymore. She was a quiet reckoning with a last name that still mattered in that airport more than anyone realized. She looked out across the tarmac and whispered to herself, "They're not ready for what happens next." While Emily quietly assembled her notes from a corner of Gate C-17, halfway across the country, in a sleek conference room on the 33rd floor of Hartley Aviation's headquarters, the tremors had already started. "Is it true?" COO Ronald Kessler stood at the edge of the boardroom table, holding a printout of an urgent message flagged from the internal passenger relations system. A teen passenger with a valid first-class ticket was removed, and her last name was Hartley. Across from him, Marla Chen, VP of Corporate Affairs, leaned forward. The report was filed anonymously, but yes, it says the girl was escorted off Flight 382 at the request of a flight attendant named Bradley Whitmore and reassigned to economy. No recorded misconduct, no breach of policy, just moved. Ronald's jaw clenched. If that's Emily, and this story breaks before we know what happened, she owns 62% of the company through the Hartley Trust, Marla finished grimly. And she was traveling incognito, just like her grandfather used to do. For a beat, no one spoke. The air in the room felt tighter than usual. Ronald dropped the printout on the table and rubbed his temples. "Where's Martin?" Martin Fairchild, Senior Director of Internal Risk and longtime friend of the late James Hartley, had been assigned as the quiet eyes and ears for the trust. He knew everything about Emily's movements, even when others didn't. But today, his phone had gone straight to voicemail. She was supposed to fly under E. Hartley. No VIP alerts, no protocol, Marla said, scrolling through the passenger management dashboard. Just like she requested, but someone clearly overrode that. Ronald's voice lowered. If she was mistreated publicly, and that gets out before we contain it, it won't just be a PR issue. That's a direct shareholder risk. 62% shareholder. A soft chime echoed in the room as Marla's phone lit up again. A new message. Her face stiffened as she read aloud. Board oversight requested. Passenger asserts legal standing via family trust. Incident documented. Legal review in progress. Damn it, Ronald muttered. She's already started. Back at the airport, Emily's day had shifted from observation to action. She wasn't broadcasting anything. No tweets, no press. But she had sent a secure copy of her documentation to Aunt Clara, the quiet but formidable estate attorney who had managed the Hartley Trust since Emily was born. The response had come quickly, in classic Clara fashion. "I'll review and elevate this through the legal chain. Do not engage further without counsel present. And Emily, Well done. Your grandfather would be proud." Emily hadn't needed praise, but that last line made her eyes sting just a little. She closed her notebook, tucked it into her messenger bag, and began walking slowly toward the executive lounge. Not to enter, but to observe. Every interaction, every sideways glance, every name badge. She logged them silently. She wasn't just collecting emotional evidence. She was building a factual timeline. That evening, as the West Coast sun dipped low over the Hartley Tower, an urgent meeting was called in the legal department. "We have a passenger-initiated compliance review," announced Clarissa Hume, head of legal strategy. "And the passenger, we now believe, is the majority shareholder of this entire airline." A hush fell over the room. "Initial crew testimony is vague," she continued, pulling up footage on the main screen. "But we have one video from a bystander posted privately to an employee group chat. It shows Flight Attendant Bradley telling her, quote, 'This seat isn't for people like you.'" Someone in the room exhaled hard through their nose. "Did he know who she was?" asked a junior attorney. Clarissa shook her head. "Not at the time, but that's not the point. That phrase, 'people like you,' it's actionable." "Where is Bradley now?" "Still in the air. Flight 382 is en route to Chicago." "And does he know yet who she was?" Clarissa's look said everything. Not yet, but he was about to. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit hotel room near the airport, Olivia, Emily's reluctant ally from earlier, sat cross-legged on the bed, staring at her laptop. Her finger hovered over the send button. The email was addressed to hr@hartleyaviation.com with a BCC to the anonymous ethics tip line. Attached were her notes, her experience, her statement. She read the subject line one more time. Incident on Flight 382. Statement from cabin crew. Then she pressed send. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since joining the airline, she didn't feel like she was hiding behind silence anymore. By the end of the day, 6 people inside Hartley Aviation's upper circle had pinged the same alert channel. "Potential crisis. Sensitive shareholder incident, escalating quickly." And one old man's portrait, James Hartley, framed above the lobby of the company's headquarters, suddenly felt less like a relic of the past and more like a warning to anyone who had forgotten his legacy. Because that portrait wasn't just a symbol, it was a promise. And Emily, the quiet 15-year-old no one had recognized, was about to remind them of exactly what it meant. Back in Chicago, the corporate headquarters of Hartley Aviation had shifted from calm to chaos within a single hour. A red alert on the internal governance dashboard had triggered a silent storm in the upper floors. Senior legal counsel, corporate PR, the trust office. But none of them expected what happened next. A call came through, direct, secure, and unmistakable in tone. It was from Judge Lenora Whitfield, chair of the Hartley Family Trust Oversight Board. "Bring the executive committee to conference room 17B, now," was all she said. At 4:12 p.m., the long mahogany table in room 17B was surrounded by 12 people. Most had no idea what was coming. Some looked annoyed. A few looked nervous. Then the double doors opened, and in walked a small, pale girl in a navy blue cardigan, jeans, and white sneakers. She looked like a high school freshman, but behind her were Clara Jensen, a state attorney for the Hartley Trust, and Judge Whitfield, who said nothing at all as she pulled out the head chair and took a seat. The girl placed a slim manila folder on the table. No one reached for it. Ronald Kessler was the first to speak. "Excuse me, but who exactly is—" "She's the reason you're all still employed," Judge Whitfield said dryly. "You might want to sit down for this." Ronald blinked, then sat. "This," Clara began, "is Emily Grace Hartley, sole living descendant of James Hartley, and, per his irrevocable directives, the controlling beneficiary of 62% of Hartley Aviation stock. That ownership was transferred upon her 15th birthday, 5 weeks ago." Dead silence. She also holds veto power over board decisions, merger attempts, and executive appointments, Clara continued, all of which your office was notified of, but apparently did not bother reading. Ronald's mouth opened, then closed. Emily opened the folder. "Here's the transcript from my flight this morning," she said, sliding it down the table. "Here's the name of the flight attendant who humiliated me, and here," she tapped a separate sheet, "is a list of 3 crew members who stood by and did nothing." She looked around the table. Her voice was soft but steady. "They told me I didn't belong in first class, that I must be confused. One of them laughed when I showed my ticket." A woman at the end of the table, VP of Customer Experience, cleared her throat. "Miss Hartley, I'm sure it wasn't—" "Stop," Clara said firmly. "You are not here to explain. You are here to listen." Emily nodded slightly toward her attorney in gratitude. She then took out a small object wrapped in tissue paper and placed it in the center of the table. It was a broken, antique pocket watch. "My grandfather gave me this the day before he died," she said. "It was his good luck charm on every business trip. He told me that when the time came, I'd know how to use it." Someone, maybe Ronald, shifted uncomfortably in their chair. "The crew broke it when they moved my bag. They didn't even apologize." Upstairs, in the glass-walled war room of corporate comms, the real damage began to register. One of the junior analysts had just discovered that a video from the flight had been uploaded to TikTok. Privately at first, but now leaking to Twitter and Reddit. It showed Emily calmly standing, then quietly saying, "I paid for this seat. You're making a mistake." The clip cut off before the crew responded, but the implication was explosive. And someone had tagged it. Hashtag she owns the Airline. Back in 17B, the mood had shifted entirely. Judge Whitfield stood. "This company has just violated every ethical standard your founder lived by. You've embarrassed the Hartley legacy, and you've proven, frankly, that James Hartley was right to bypass the board and entrust the company to his granddaughter instead." Ronald looked like he might faint. "Effective immediately," Clara said. "The trust office is exercising its emergency authority. The following steps will be taken. 1. Crew member Bradley Whitmore is suspended without pay pending full investigation. 2. All security and cabin audio from Flight 382 is to be reviewed by the Trust's legal team. 3. Every executive present will file a personal statement of accountability within 24 hours. Emily added, "And I want a written apology. Not just to me. To every passenger in economy who watched it happen and thought, if they'll treat her that way, what chance do I have?" Silence again. Then Judge Whitfield said, "Meeting adjourned." As they left the room, Clara turned to Emily. "You handled that with more composure than most CEOs twice your age." Emily gave a small smile. "I just remembered what Grandpa used to say." "What's that?" Emily looked out over the tarmac from the 33rd floor window. "You don't raise your voice when you own the building. You just bring the receipts." The next morning, a quiet storm began brewing at Hartley Aviation headquarters. The headlines hadn't hit yet. The videos hadn't gone viral. But inside the company's internal systems, red flags were popping up like wildfire. Emily Hartley sat at the far end of the executive conference room, not the grand 17B room from the day before, but a smaller, more focused space inside the Office of Operations. She was dressed simply again, her long hair pulled back in a low ponytail, holding a mug of chamomile tea. To anyone else, she might have looked like someone's intern. No one would have guessed she held 62% of the company. Except this time, they knew. Across from her sat Marcus Thorne, Chief Operating Officer of Hartley Aviation. His face was pale, his collar slightly wilted. Next to him was Ava Rutherford, Head of PR and Crisis Management, tapping her pen nervously against a legal pad. "Miss Hartley," Marcus began, clearing his throat. "We've identified all crew members from Flight 382. The lead flight attendant, Bradley Whitmore, has been placed on administrative leave pending review. The other 2 have been—" "No," Emily said, her voice calm. "They're not on leave. They're fired." Ava leaned forward. I understand your frustration, but if we follow proper internal protocol— This isn't frustration, Emily interrupted. It's accountability. You don't humiliate a paying passenger, especially not one who owns the airline, and expect a memo to fix it. Marcus exhaled slowly. I agree with the sentiment, but the union may challenge it. Emily raised an eyebrow. Let them. She slid a slim folder across the table. Inside were signed affidavits from 6 passengers on that flight. Passengers who had watched the entire incident unfold. 3 had already posted online. 1 was a school teacher from Michigan. Another, a retired Air Force colonel. The third, a woman named Deshauna Ellis, was already a minor TikTok celebrity. Her video, ##that was the owner, had crossed 400K views overnight. By noon, it would pass 1 million. Emily turned toward Ava. What's our media position? We're in damage control mode, Ava admitted. Local news has picked up the story. 2 major outlets are reaching out for comment. So far, we've kept your name out of it. Why? Emily asked. Ava blinked. Because you're 15. Emily smiled thinly. Exactly. And if the world finds out that a 15-year-old owns the airline and still got kicked out of first class, tell me again how that makes us look? The room fell silent. I want a press statement on my terms, Emily said. Not spin, not legalese. A real one. From me. The statement went live at 2:13 p.m. Yesterday, I was removed from my assigned seat in first class. Not because of a mistake, but because of a perception that I didn't belong. The irony is, I belong more than most. I am the sole grandchild of James Hartley, the founder of Hartley Aviation, and I hold 62% of its shares. But this isn't about me. It's about what our company chooses to stand for. Every passenger, no matter their age, appearance, or background, deserves dignity. Effective immediately, I've directed terminations and begun a full review of training protocols, because silence would be easier, but silence isn't leadership. Within 30 minutes, CNN picked it up. By 6:00 p.m., Emily's name trended globally. At the same time, inside the airline's operations center, a deeper audit was underway. Marcus, now fully aligned with Emily, had assembled a task force to investigate discrimination complaints filed over the past 12 months. The numbers were staggering. Over 200 unresolved claims, nearly 80% filed by passengers with non-traditional names, nearly all dismissed by middle management. Emily reviewed each personally. By dinner time, she had a red-marked spreadsheet spread across her grandfather's old desk. This isn't isolated, she murmured. This is cultural. And she wasn't wrong. At 8:45 p.m., a low-level HR assistant named Joel Ramirez sent an anonymous email to the trust office. Attached were internal memos, ones he wasn't supposed to have. One outlined an unofficial courtesy placement program, which routinely bumped elderly white passengers into premium seating at the expense of others. At 9:15 p.m., Emily made one more call to a woman named Barbara Lansing. Barbara had been her grandfather's most trusted diversity officer before retiring 2 years earlier. When she picked up, her voice was warm, scratchy, and unmistakably no nonsense. I've been watching the news, Barbara said. I need help, Emily replied. Then you called the right old lady. By midnight, Bradley Whitmore's termination had been finalized. The last sentence on the termination notice read, Your conduct on Flight 382 was not only unbecoming of this airline, it was an insult to its legacy. Emily went to bed that night with the pocket watch repaired and back on her nightstand. Ticking again, but this time the hands were hers to move. The morning sun barely crept through the half-closed blinds of the small airport office when Emily sat down across from Mr. Carver, the senior ground operations manager at Silverline Airways. He was in his late 60s, with thick-rimmed glasses perched at the edge of his nose and a desk cluttered with paperwork. Emily sat quietly, her bruised pride hidden beneath a calm exterior. She handed over a photograph. one that had fallen from her vintage carry-on bag when the flight attendant had tried to wrestle it from her hands the day before. It was the same photo she always kept tucked behind her ID, her and her grandfather, James Hartley, standing beside the very first Silverline plane. Her hand was tiny in his, but the smile on both their faces said everything about the bond they shared. Mr. Carver squinted at the photo, his brow furrowing in slow realization. "This is you?" he asked, holding it up to the light. Emily nodded. "That's from the day the first route launched out of Dayton. I was 5. Grandpa brought me into the cockpit before takeoff. Said the company would be mine to protect one day." Carver set the photo down and folded his hands slowly. "I remember that launch. Everyone wore those ridiculous silver sashes. Your grandfather gave a speech about legacy and fairness. I didn't know he had family still involved." Emily's voice stayed quiet. "He left everything to me through the Hartley Family Trust. I turn 18 in a couple years, but I already have full voting power over the board. 62% of the company." Carver's eyes widened. "And no one told the current flight crew?" Emily shook her head. "I fly incognito, like Grandpa used to. It's the only way I can really see how passengers are treated, how employees treat people who don't look important. Yesterday's flight told me more than 1,000 quarterly reports ever could." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "And now?" Emily's voice firmed. "I'm calling an emergency review of all first-class complaints, especially those dismissed without proper process. I want surveillance logs pulled, names documented, and protocols reviewed. I'll also be asking for internal memos, especially from anyone who supported moving me from my seat." Carver nodded slowly, suddenly very aware of the magnitude of the moment. Meanwhile, word of Emily's identity had begun to ripple through the terminal. Not from her, but from a flight crew member who'd seen her enter Carver's office, photos still in hand. Whispers turned into questions. By midday, the employee group chat was ablaze. Screenshots of the old photo, matched with an article from a 2010 Silverline Anniversary magazine, had gone viral. By 3 p.m., the terminal manager called Emily with a quiet urgency. "You need to see this," she said. In the staff meeting room, a monitor showed a live social media feed. A passenger who'd witnessed the incident had posted a clip of the confrontation from the gate area. It showed the flight attendant confronting Emily, the woman asking for the teen's seat, and Emily holding up her ticket calmly. "I paid for this seat," she said in the video, her voice clear but never raised. "Please don't touch my bag." The post had over 300,000 views already. Another video followed, showing the plane being delayed due to a crew issue, then the entire flight being rescheduled. The airline had issued a vague apology, but comments were pouring in. This girl had every right to sit there. Why is a teen being treated like this? And then someone connected the dots. Wait, is this the Hartley granddaughter? Hashtags were trending by sunset. Hashtag she owns 62%. Hashtag Hartley legacy. First class truth. Emily sat in the break room watching the live surge with quiet restraint. She hadn't asked for this. She never wanted to go viral. But the moment had arrived. Carver came in and offered her a steaming mug of tea. "There's gonna be blowback," he warned. Emily nodded. "I'm ready. Grandpa said legacy only matters if it helps people, so I'll make sure it does." That evening, she drafted her first open statement as the controlling shareholder. Short, pointed, and written in her voice. Silverline Airways was built on fairness and dignity. Yesterday, both were violated. As granddaughter of the founder and controlling stakeholder, I am initiating a full review of passenger treatment policies. No employee, regardless of rank, has the right to humiliate another human being. That's not how we fly. The post hit 1 million views by midnight. Back in her hotel room, Emily sat quietly, clutching the old photo in her hand. For the first time, she didn't feel like just a teenage girl who happened to hold power on paper. She felt like someone stepping into the role she was always meant to fill. And somewhere, in the still silence, she imagined her grandfather's voice again. "Don't let the uniform fool you. Power reveals itself in how people treat those they don't recognize. Tomorrow, the company would begin to change, and Emily Hartley, just 15 years old, would be the one leading the charge. The clock read 4:02 p.m. when the first official response came in. An urgent internal memo blasted across Silverline Airways executive channels. The subject line was short and direct. Immediate action required. Incident 11745 JEH. 6 minutes after Emily's statement had been posted, a full-on internal investigation was launched. The CEO, now aware of Emily's identity and her majority control, didn't hesitate. By 4:08 p.m., an all-hands directive had been issued. The flight attendant at the center of the incident, Ms. Danielle Sparks, was placed on indefinite leave. The purser, gate supervisor, and even the customer service manager on duty were pulled from active roles pending review. Emily had no desire for public vengeance, but the company's legal team, now scrambling to contain reputational damage, knew they had no choice but to move swiftly. In the command center of Terminal 3, a team of corporate officers began downloading security footage. They reviewed every frame, from the check-in desk to the boarding gate to the confrontation in first class. The footage showed Emily presenting her valid ticket, calm, respectful, and then being told, "This seat is for someone who looks like they belong here." That one line, recorded on both airport audio logs and a passenger's phone, hit social media by 4:20. It became the soundbite that defined the moment. Within the hour, Silverline's PR firm, Lindell Strategies, advised issuing a formal public apology, but Emily beat them to it. She posted again, "To every young girl who's ever been told she doesn't belong, you do. And if you ever forget, remember this. Sometimes the quietest person in the room owns the building." The post exploded. Celebrities, CEOs, and influencers shared it with captions like, "Chills," "Power," "Respect." In the middle of all this, Emily remained grounded. She hadn't left the airport. Instead, she asked for a quiet room where she could meet with a few employees, flight attendants who had reached out privately, apologizing for what happened and offering to speak up about broader patterns of bias. What Emily heard in that room broke her heart. Stories of passengers of color being double-checked, single moms being asked to justify their upgrades, teen boys being told to dress better if they wanted to sit in business class, and flight crew, especially junior staff, being too scared to speak up. One young steward, barely 24, nearly cried as he recounted being reprimanded for helping a disabled teen girl who was moved to the back of the plane for balance. Emily didn't cry. She took notes, every word. That evening, she made one final call to her family's longtime lawyer, Mr. Hollins. Together, they initiated a clause in the Hartley Trust. When patterns of systemic mistreatment are proven within the company, the majority stakeholder may activate a special intervention protocol. That protocol? Full board override. At 8:00 p.m., Emily triggered it. The entire board of directors received a summons. An emergency meeting the next morning at 7:00 a.m. sharp. Attendance mandatory. Purpose: restoration of Hartley principles and immediate policy review. Meanwhile, the internet continued its frenzy. Major news outlets were picking up the story now. CNN ran the headline, "Teen granddaughter of airline founder stuns industry with quiet power move." Silverline stock dipped slightly after hours, but analysts were optimistic. Emily's transparency, her poise, her refusal to lash out, these were viewed as signs of strength. Back in her hotel suite, Emily sat in silence, phone off, eyes staring at the city skyline. Her tea had gone cold. Her mind wasn't on PR wins or shareholder reactions. She was thinking about every person who ever sat in the wrong seat just because someone else assumed they didn't belong. She thought of her grandfather, and she thought of the little girl she used to be, watching him from the tarmac, dreaming of a sky where everyone had a seat. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be just a symbol. She'd be the one holding the gavel. And this time, everyone would listen. At precisely 7 o'clock a.m., the boardroom atop Silverline Airways' downtown headquarters filled with uneasy energy. The floor-to-ceiling windows cast a pale golden hue over the long mahogany table. 11 of the 12 board members were present, some bleary-eyed, some irritated, and all unprepared for what awaited them. Emily Hartley was already seated at the head of the table. No fanfare, no dramatics, just a teenage girl in a navy blazer with a single manila folder beside her. The room went quiet as they noticed her. "Good morning," she said, voice calm, composed, but unmistakably firm. "Let's begin." Her lawyer, Mr. Hollins, stood by her side as she slid the folder open and distributed copies of a 10-page summary. It outlined the protocol she'd invoked. Article 9.3 of the Hartley Family Trust. When ethical violations are proven to cause measurable harm to passengers or employees, the Trust's controlling party may override standard governance for corrective action. One board member, Mr. Langdon, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Emily, this is highly unusual." "So, was what happened yesterday," she replied. "And we're not here to debate formality. We're here to address a culture that nearly derailed the legacy this airline was built on." She gestured toward the TV screen behind her, where Darius, the junior steward from the night before, appeared live via secure video feed. His hand trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "I watched passengers get treated differently based on how they looked. I was told to stop assisting certain travelers too visibly, especially in first class. I love my job, but I've also been afraid of losing it every time I did the right thing." The silence was deafening. Emily followed up with a series of internal reports. Customer complaints buried, complaints against crew members never reviewed, internal memos filled with coded language. "The problem isn't just one employee," she said. "It's the system that protected them." Ms. Blake, the longest-serving board member and a personal friend of her grandfather, finally spoke. "Emily, this protocol, it's legally sound. But do you understand what using it means? You'll be holding the board personally accountable." "I understand," Emily said softly. "But I also understand what it means to sit in a seat and be told you don't belong there, when you know you do." She paused, scanning the room. "This isn't retribution. This is realignment. We're restoring Hartley values, dignity, integrity, and fairness." One by one, the board members shifted. Some averted their eyes. Others nodded slowly. No one objected when she outlined the next steps. Independent ethics review of all active crew and supervisors. Public acknowledgement and apology from the board. Restatement of the Hartley Inclusion Charter, signed by every employee, from C-suite to ground crew. Immediate retraining for all customer-facing roles. A new advisory panel chaired by Emily herself, with quarterly reporting to stakeholders. Langdon spoke again, this time with resignation. "We underestimated you." "You underestimated what quiet leadership looks like," she corrected. The vote was held at 7:47 a.m. The board voted unanimously to enact all 5 measures. By 8 a.m., press briefings were prepared. Emily would make a statement by noon. But for now, she sat alone for a moment longer. The morning sun crept further across the conference table. The Hartley legacy had not just been preserved, it had been reclaimed, and its next chapter had just begun. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Silverline's top executives began arriving at headquarters, eyes bleary, nerves tight. A few shuffled in, still processing the headline that dominated the morning news. 15-year-old granddaughter of Airline founder orders emergency board meeting. The boardroom on the 40th floor, normally pristine and orderly, was now charged with tension. Security had increased since yesterday's events. All board members had been told their attendance was non-negotiable. The summons had come through a rarely used clause in the Hartley Trust. One most assumed was ceremonial. Until now. Emily sat at the head of the long mahogany table. No blazer, no makeup, no advisors whispering in her ear. Just her notes, and the unshakable clarity that something had to change. Behind her hung a photo of her grandfather, James Hartley, beaming next to the first Silverline jet. One by one, the members filed in, some curious, others defensive. Mr. Lewiston, head of investor relations, was already flipping through his printed agenda. Ms. Park, chief operations officer, gave Emily a respectful nod as she took her seat. And finally, Vincent Hale, current board chairman, entered briskly with 2 lawyers in tow. He gave Emily a tight smile. "Let's make this quick," he said, setting down his leather portfolio. "We have a company to run." Emily met his gaze calmly. "Then let's get started." She didn't begin with legal jargon or preamble. She started with a story. "Last night, I sat with 5 employees of this airline. They shared things I can't unhear. Stories of mistreatment, silent retaliation, and being too afraid to speak up. And what broke my heart most was that none of them were surprised by what happened to me. They'd seen it before." She paused, letting the silence settle. "This company carries my family's name. It was built on the idea that anyone, no matter how they look, deserves dignity and a fair shot at the sky. Somewhere along the way, that got lost. And today, we're going to talk about how to fix it." Mr. Hale raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, Miss Hartley, this board follows procedure. You can't just declare a takeover because your seat was misassigned." "This isn't about a seat," Emily replied sharply. "It's about what the seat symbolized and the pattern it revealed." She tapped the folder in front of her. Darius, a young data analyst and one of her few trusted allies inside corporate, had spent the night pulling flight complaint records. Here are 376 complaints flagged in the last 14 months that mention discriminatory behavior. Only 12 resulted in any disciplinary action. We average more complaints from non-white passengers than our competitors by 42%. Ms. Park leaned forward, visibly concerned. "Why didn't we see this in our compliance reviews?" "Because someone filtered them out before they reached your desk," Emily said, handing her a flash drive. "Cross-check this with your logs. You'll find the gaps." She stood up now, walking slowly around the room. "You want to talk procedure? Let's talk about the one my grandfather wrote into the trust when I was 3 years old. The clause that says if the board fails to uphold the founding values of Silverline, the majority stakeholder has the right to intervene. I hold 62% of this company, and today I'm exercising that right." A stunned hush fell over the room. Even Hale's lawyers looked unsettled. "Effective immediately," Emily continued, "I'm placing the following actions into motion. Suspension of current first-class seating protocol until a full review of bias implications is completed. Immediate reinstatement of all employees who filed whistleblower complaints and were terminated or demoted without due process. Independent third-party audit of Silverline's training, passenger services, and internal disciplinary processes. And a full vote on restructuring this board with fresh appointments from outside the usual circles. People who reflect the diversity of our passengers." Mr. Hale laughed, but it rang hollow. "You think the shareholders will stand for this?" Emily turned toward the windows, where cameras from the press were already zoomed in from helicopters circling the tower. "They already are." She clicked the remote on the table. Screens around the room lit up, showing a live stream of the front steps of Silverline HQ. A crowd had gathered. Former employees, advocacy groups, influencers, reporters, all holding signs that read things like "She belongs in first class" and "Fix the skies." "Public trust is currency," Emily said softly, "and right now we're broke. You don't fix that with PR, you fix it with integrity." The vote wasn't immediate. There were arguments, legal consultations, procedural stalls, but within the hour, the tide turned. Ms. Park, visibly shaken by the data, voted in favor of the reforms. Mr. Lewiston, after a quiet phone call with key shareholders, voted yes. One by one, they joined until the final tally stood: 8 in favor, 3 opposed, 1 abstained. The motion passed. Emily sat down, her hands trembling beneath the table. She didn't show it. She simply said, "Thank you. Let's build an airline that looks like the world we serve." The meeting adjourned. Vincent Hale stood quietly, collecting his things. He didn't say goodbye. As the boardroom emptied, Emily remained in her chair, staring once again at the photo of her grandfather. "I hope I made you proud today," she whispered. She didn't know that outside, thousands were watching a live stream of that boardroom door. And when she finally stepped through it, quiet, steady, composed, they cheered not just for a girl with a title, but for a leader with a purpose. For the first time in decades, the skies over Silverline looked clearer. The hangar at Silverline Airways gleamed under midday lights as employees and invited guests filled every available seat on folding chairs lined up in neat rows. Jet engines, long silent, rested on their tarmac cradles like polished beasts tamed for today's ceremony. The steel frame of the New Horizon livery was silhouetted behind a draped banner bearing the refreshed logo Emily's grandfather had first painted by hand. A rising sun above a horizon line, now accompanied by a small, stylized silhouette of a girl's wings outstretched. Emily Hartley stood at the podium, a few inches shorter than most of the adult executives in their tailored suits, but radiating an authority no boardroom could confer. Behind her, the board members she had reshaped into champions of inclusion sat quietly, faces of every age, ethnicity, and background. A living testament to the new culture she had helped build. She cleared her throat and measured her first words carefully. She knew legacy wasn't about speeches, it was about action. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are not just unveiling a new livery, a new aircraft, or a new initiative. We are reaffirming a promise, one my grandfather made when he first founded this airline 50-odd years ago. A promise that anyone, regardless of background, age, or appearance, deserves dignity and respect every time they step aboard a Silverline flight. At that moment, the draped banner slid away in unison, revealing the first of 3 newly painted jets. The gleaming fuselage of N672SH bore the new Sun Horizon logo alongside Emily's personal inscription in fine script. "Fly higher than they say you can." The crowd erupted in applause. A veteran flight attendant dabbed at her tears. A boarding gate clerk in the back smiled broadly and mouthed, "Thank you." Emily waited patiently for silence. Then she continued, "Before I talk about our future, I want to acknowledge our past. To the crew members, supervisors, and managers whose actions let me down, whose prejudices created harm. You demonstrated exactly why we needed to change. But to the countless employees who spoke up quietly, who treated every passenger with respect when no one was watching, I see you, and you have my gratitude." A gentle murmur of agreement rose from the crowd. The best performers are rarely the loudest. Today, I'm proud to announce 2 initiatives that will carry this promise forward. She stepped aside, and banners on easels were revealed. 1. The Gloria Johnson Scholarship Program, named for Emily's grandmother, who left a $10,000 gift to fund the airline's first classroom-to-cockpit scholarship for students from underrepresented communities. Every year, 10 recipients will receive a full scholarship covering flight school, simulator time, and mentorship from Silverline pilots. 2. The Silverline Aviation Academy, a cutting-edge training center located on the outskirts of Chicago, dedicated to developing the next generation of pilots, maintenance engineers, and executives. Our curriculum will prioritize equity in recruitment, hands-on instruction, and community partnerships to ensure that talent, not privilege, determines who soars above the clouds. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle in. These programs are more than boxes on a to-do list. They represent the culmination of months of listening, to flight attendants like Olivia who risked reprisal to share their experiences, to mechanics who quietly documented disparities in aircraft assignment, to passengers who spoke up when they saw unfairness. Your voices shaped these solutions. In the front row, Olivia Africa, a name Emily never forgot, rose to her feet. The two shared a nod of mutual respect before Olivia returned to her seat, tears of pride in her eyes. Emily took a deep breath and looked out at the assembled employees, board members, and community leaders. 3 months ago, I sat as a passenger on Flight 382, clutching a photo of my grandfather and holding an airline ticket that should have made me feel welcome. Instead, I was told I didn't belong. Because of that moment, because of the cruelty I experienced, I learned that even the smallest injustice can cast a long shadow. She tapped the podium, quieting the soft background hum. But I also learned something more powerful. That one person's courage to remain calm, collect evidence, and speak truth to power can ignite a movement. Sky-high justice doesn't come from confrontation alone. It comes when we build institutions that reflect our highest ideals: equity, accountability, and respect. A hush fell over the hangar as she spoke the name of her grandfather again, reverence coloring her tone. James Hartley believed in a better way. He built an airline on that belief. Now, as his granddaughter, I'm honored to build upon it. Every time we board a plane with a smile, every time we help someone who feels invisible, every time we choose to see the person rather than the passenger, we honor that legacy. The applause this time was thunderous, reverberating against the hangar doors. Emily allowed herself a brief smile before wrapping up. Let's get started. The scholarship applications open next week. The academy doors open next summer. And starting today, every single Silver Line employee, no matter their role or title, will take the Hartley Oath of Inclusion, pledging to protect every passenger's dignity. Together, we will prove that a legacy isn't about who you are, it's about how you treat others. She stepped back as the first jet's engines roared to life, a salute from the machine her grandfather had once dreamed of building. The crowd erupted again, and employees streamed forward to take photos, shake her hand, and whisper a simple, heartfelt message. Thank you, Miss Hartley. Later that evening, Emily found herself once more in a first-class cabin. This time, her seat 1A belonged to her in every sense. The flight attendant approached with a polite smile. Welcome aboard, Miss Hartley. Can I get you anything to drink? Emily smiled back, the old photograph of her grandfather safely tucked in her handbag, now fully restored. She settled into her seat, watching the runway lights blur by as the plane lifted into the night sky. Below her, the city lights of Chicago faded into a blanket of stars. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Fly higher than they say you can." And from somewhere above, she felt her grandfather's gentle presence, proud and unshakable, because the sky he once dreamed of belonged to everyone at last. Later that evening, as the last of the guests filtered out of the hangar and the newly christened jet slid into its nighttime slumber, Emily found herself alone beside the polished fuselage. The soft glow of the hangar lights traced the curve of the wing, and for a moment she let herself simply listen to the hum of distant engines, the faint clatter of closing doors, even her own heartbeat. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the restored photograph of her grandfather, now tucked into a slim leather case. She traced his smiling face with her fingertip and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." Then she set the photo gently on the wing strut, as if offering it back to the sky itself. Behind her, footsteps echoed. It was Olivia, the young flight attendant who'd first stood up for her on that fateful morning. "I came to say thank you," Olivia said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "for showing me, and everyone else, that one voice whispered at the right time can change everything." Emily smiled, sliding the photo back into her pocket. "Thank you for speaking up too. This isn't just my victory, it's ours. Every person who refused to stay silent helped us build a better airline." They stood in companionable silence, 2 generations joined by a shared purpose. Outside, the tarmac stretched away into the darkness, but here, in this quiet moment at the edge of the world, they both felt, for the first time, that the sky belonged to everyone, and that truly, nothing could ever take it away again.